Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you the first of some of the end of the year content that I like to have here on my channel. And today, even though we have about 2 weeks left in 2020, I want to talk about my favorite books of the year, because I feel like, though I am finishing up a couple of books, that those books are not quite favorites for the year. So I feel comfortable doing this list right now, even though the year isn't totally over. So the way that I kind of compile my favorites list every year is I like to kind of go through the genres that I read, because I do read a lot of different genres, and pick my favorite from those different genres. So that means that this isn't going to be a list of all the 5-star books that I read this year. Some of the books on this list are 4 stars, and there's even one on here that was only a 3-star, which I know is kind of weird, but I like to keep it interesting, so that's the way I do it. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my favorite books of 2020. Okay, so the first favorite that I want to mention is my favorite audiobook of 2020. And this is one I don't think I've done before. I don't think I've ever picked a favorite audiobook, but I thought that this year it would be kind of fun to do. And this year, my favorite audiobook that I listened to was The Golden Compass. And the reason that I really liked this audiobook, even though in the end the book was just a 3-star book, and one where it was the first book in a series, I'm probably not going to continue with the series. However, the audiobook was so good. It was a full cast, so, you know, different people voicing all of the different characters. There was like the sound effects and stuff in the background, music and things like that. It was a very good audiobook, and I would highly recommend it if you're interested in starting that series or, you know, reading The Golden Compass. I would definitely recommend that one. Alright, so I have my stack here, I have my list here, so I might be looking down a little bit, because for each genre, for the most part, I tallied up how many books I read in that genre, so I could kind of tell you out of that many which one was my favorite. So the first one I'm going to talk about is my favorite middle grade or YA book. And I read 11 middle grade or YA books this year, but my favorite one was Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the first book in a series, and I'm hoping to start the second book very soon. But this one I really enjoyed. The reason it was my favorite was because of the sort of magicalness of it. The idea, the whole kind of concept of the book, and this book especially, is there's like a competition going on, and it was really fun. Just some of the tasks or trials that our main character Morgan had to go through were just really cool and fun. I really liked the world, and I really like Morgan as a character, because she's not this like super bubbly kind of like, oh, you know, inquisitive, cute little girl. Like, she's pretty serious and isn't always like sunshine and rainbows, and I really like that about her. So yeah, this was my favorite middle grade / YA book of the year. Okay, so the next category is classics, and I gotta say, I didn't read as many classics as I should have this year. I only read 3 classics that I'm counting, because I forgot to mention too in my intro, I don't count rereads in my favorites. So I did read 4 classics, I think, but one of them was a reread, so okay. So I read 3 classics this year that were new to me, and my favorite one was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Is that what it is? I don't remember. Here's the picture of the cover though. It was a very short little thing, but it packed a punch. I loved it. I definitely want to read more of this author's work, because this one really grabbed me, and kind of the ending just like left me kind of like uncomfortable and feeling a little like haunted. So it was great, beautiful writing, very ahead of its time, I felt, in the subject matter, and yeah, I loved it. Okay, so the next one is a category that I'm gonna call genre bender or genre blend, because the books could have kind of fit into a number of genres, so I didn't want to put them into just like one category, because they fit a couple. And I have 2 for this one because I couldn't decide. I forgot to tally up how many of these I had, but there were a few. But these 2 were my favorite of the genre blends that I read. The first one is Boy's Life by Robert McGammon. I haven't reviewed this yet on my channel. I know, guys, I know. I promise it's coming. Hopefully it comes by the end of December. If not, it'll be early January. But this quickly, within the first probably chapter, I knew that this was a favorite. I just loved it. And it blends a lot of genres. There's magical realism, there's a little bit of horror, there's a little bit of mystery, it's coming of age, it's historical fiction, it's a lot of things, but the writing was absolutely beautiful. And I need to read more of this author's work because this was just fantastic. And then the other one is a favorite author of mine, and that is Michael McDowell's Gilded Needles. And this one is historical fiction, but it's also kind of horror, kind of suspense. And yeah, I loved this because it was so dark and so atmospheric. It took place in 1800s New York City, and I just love that setting. And this is a great sort of revenge story that's really slow and takes its time, and it was just dark and delicious, and I loved it. Okay, the next category is historical fiction, and I read 5 historical fiction novels this year, so not too bad, not too bad. I feel like I usually read more than that, but it's okay, it's fine. And my favorite historical fiction that I read this year was The Lake House by Kate Morton. And the reason that I loved this one so much, and ended up being my favorite, was I loved the setting. The setting was just so beautiful. It takes place in the 1930s in England, and it takes place on this estate. What was the estate called? Anyway, I couldn't find it. I don't remember what the estate was called, but it was absolutely gorgeous. This big, beautiful house kind of tucked in the middle of nowhere with a lake, and it was just beautiful. And I also really enjoyed the story. It was a great mystery. It's one of those historical fictions that goes back and forth in time, and I just, usually in a story like that, I usually favor kind of one story over the other. But in this one, I enjoyed both. I enjoyed the present day story and the one taking place in the past, and this was just great, and I really loved it. I'm gonna keep saying that for every single book. Okay, so for my next category, it's gonna be nonfiction, and I decided to break up nonfiction into just like nonfiction and then memoirs, because I read both, and I feel like even though they're both nonfiction, they are kind of their own category. So, yes. And I read total, memoirs and nonfiction together, I read 12. So not bad, that averages out to like 1 a month, which is good. So, but the first one I'm gonna mention is my favorite memoir. This should not come as any surprise to anybody, because I've mentioned this in a few videos now, but All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a fantastic memoir. I just loved it so much. I listened to it on audio, highly recommend, because George Johnson narrates the audiobook, and it just kind of brings the whole thing to life. I just really, really loved it. There's some great discussions in here just about intersectionality and about what it's like to grow up not only a black man, but a gay black man in America. And I think he just has a lot of insight and knowledge and information for young people, especially young people that are gay, black, or both. So I loved this so much, and that's why it's my favorite memoir this year. Okay, so then for my favorite nonfiction book, I couldn't pick just one, because there were 2 that just really, really have stuck with me, and that I really, really loved and appreciated reading this year. And the first one is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This is basically a history of the United States, but it's kind of focused, its lens is more looking at how racism evolved in America. Its beginnings back when we were still colonies, all the way to present day. And this was just such an eye-opening book. I have so many things underlined and kind of written in the margins in this book that I don't normally do that, but this book had me doing that because I was just learning so much. And so this is such an important book, especially if you are looking to learn more about anti-racism and things like that. This is a great place to start, I think, because like I said, it's all about our history. And so it's a great way to kind of take or start that journey. And yeah, I loved this. I loved the way that it was set up. The writing, though this is a big book and it's got a lot of information. The writing is very approachable, just very good, and I highly recommend this to anyone. And then the other nonfiction book that it just really stuck with me, and I have to talk about in my favorites, is Columbine by Dave Cullen. This is about the Columbine school shootings that happened back in April of 1999, and it's a very in-depth look at what happened, the events leading up to the shooting in terms of what the two shooters were, you know, what they were doing and kind of where they were. And then also it looks at the aftermath, because this book came out about 10 years, I believe, after the attack happened. And so Dave Cullen is a journalist who was there covering what was happening the day that it was happening. And so he was very invested, and you could tell he really did his research. He really I think he covered all the bases. He talked to as many people as he could from various aspects of this tragedy. And I thought it was just very, very, very well done. Okay, next up is contemporary, and I read 10 contemporary novels this year. And my favorite one, though, is actually the last one that I read, and that is Gun Love by Jennifer Clement. This one ended up being my favorite because the writing was just so good. It was so good. And I think you find that a lot in contemporary novels. The writing is just usually just what really drags you, what really pulls you in, maybe drags you in, I don't know. This one, though, it was just so kind of like otherworldly, and it just felt like magical realism, even though it wasn't. And the topics discussed, not really discussed, kind of just presented, were, I think, really important, really thought-provoking. And what I loved about this, like I said in my review of this book, is that Jennifer Clement presents this sort of story with a, you know, it's about guns, it's about gun violence at its core, but she doesn't tell you how to think. She just kind of tells the story and you make your own conclusions, and I really, really appreciated that and loved that about this book. And now I need to find more Jennifer Clement books because I want to read them all, because I loved her writing so much. All right, so then the next category, I kind of lumped together them because I have thrillers, mysteries, and suspense kind of lumped together because, I don't know, it's just kind of how I wanted to do it. And I read 11 of those this year, but my favorite, by far, my favorite was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Whew. Whew. It was my first time reading Karen Slaughter, and it will not be the last because that book was so good. It was so intense, and people told me, like, her books are really gritty, they're really intense, and they were absolutely right. This book has a lot of grit. It is a very intense story. It took turns I wasn't expecting. Basically, the whole story was kind of like a surprise. Like, it didn't go where I was thinking it was gonna go, but it was a very, like, pleasant surprise. So yeah, Karen Slaughter is one that I definitely need to read more of her work. That story was just super intense, had me on the edge of my seat, couldn't put it down, absolutely loved it. Okay, and then my last category that I want to talk about is horror. I read 17 horror novels this year, so that was like the most, the biggest category that came out of this year for me was horror, which isn't really a big surprise. And I read 17, and I have 2 that were favorites because I couldn't narrow it down to just one. So the first favorite was The Dark Half by Stephen King, and this was like one of those Stephen King books that I feel like is under the radar. Like, you don't see a lot of people talking about this one, but it's like a new favorite of mine from him because this book was just so cool. Like, the concept was really cool. There's some amazing horror elements in here, just awesome kind of visuals, and I just loved it. I loved everything about it. So, and it's exciting because it has been a while since I've had a 5-star Stephen King book, but this one was so good. So yeah, if you're out there and you haven't read The Dark Half and you're curious about Stephen King, check this one out because it's really, really good. And then the other one that was a favorite, that was a new release, this year, 2020, is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This one was a favorite because I loved the horror elements, first of all, in here. There were definitely some scenes that just had me cringing and just totally just grossed out, which is always fun, And I hadn't read a vampire story in a while when I picked this up, and it was great. It was just kind of fun to have another vampire story to read because, like I said, it's been a while. And this one I really liked because it kind of played with the idea of like what would happen if a housewife, basically, a Southern housewife, had to go up against somebody like Dracula. And so that whole idea was just really fun, and it just took me on a really wild ride, and I had a great time reading it, so I loved this. All right, guys, so those are my favorite books of 2020. Please let me know down below what some of your favorite books were, because I would love to hear. These are one of my favorite videos to make and to kind of engage with people, because it's all about like gushing about your favorite books you read. I mean, isn't that what reading is all about, right? So yeah, please let me know what your favorites were, because I would love to hear them. And let me know if you read any of these books, what you thought of them. Would you consider them a favorite or not? Let's talk about it. So, all right, like I said, this is the first of some of the kind of end of the year content that I plan on having this year. So yeah, I will be back soon with another video. And until then, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I will talk with you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.